Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's the way I'm making my podcast right now. And it's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. And Anchor is going to distribute your podcast to all the major important places you would ever want, like Spotify and Apple and so many more places. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. I love it. It's so simple. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hi, I'm Lindsay, and welcome to the Intuitive Psychologist podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I've been in the mental health field for over 15 years. During my spiritual awakening, I've realized that psychology is really missing the mark. I believe that traditional therapy combined with spirituality can actually lead to long-term healing and growth. And I've actually had the luxury of seeing this happen within my own private practice, where I've tried to incorporate the two together. My intention for this podcast is to discuss my opinions about spirituality and therapy, and I like to do it in a fun way. My hope is that I'll inspire other people to explore different ways to improve their lives. But I'd also like to normalize what many people have been going through or are currently going through, so that you can know that you're not alone and that you're not crazy. And maybe along the way I can inspire a few therapists along the way to actually think outside the box and to offer their own version of intuitive healing. If this is interesting to you, then join me on this journey as we try to have fun and explore an informal way to bridge the gap between psychology and spirituality. Welcome back, my friends. So, I have a little bit of a different way I'm going to handle the next couple episodes. I actually want to do a bit of a series on attachment styles, relationships, sex, and how to heal. So on this, I will talk about the different attachment styles, secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and the anxious attachment in adults, and how to identify which one you are, how to identify which one your partner is, and how to, if you are insecure, or if you're anxious or if you're avoidant, how to heal to have more secure attachment. Then I want to talk about twin flames versus soulmates and how to determine which sort of relationship you're in, and how to heal any sort of trauma from childhood that affected your way of forming attachments with other adults. So I think that this will be a fun couple of episodes that we'll go over. First, though, I wanted to start off by sort of laying some background information about how attachment styles even form in childhood that then lead into adulthood, which is what you're probably dealing with right now. You know, most of us are managing some sort of relationship issue because that is how we heal any sort of traumatic experiences or challenging personality traits. Is first we must learn about it, then get some help to start to heal, but then the healing only really takes place when we are in relationship. And most of my clients have been coming to me about relationships, and I know that this is really important because either we are looking for love in all the wrong places, or we are in a relationship and maybe things aren't going as great as you would like. Some people may wonder, is this even the right person? I've had a lot of clients come to me for that. And even if you're in a good relationship, there are things that come up, challenges for every relationship that they must go through. So just think that this is a good topic for right now. So, what is attachment? Attachment is what happens when you are very young. We can say 0 to 2 years is the most important couple of years. A lot of researchers will say 6 months to 2 years is where the attachment style really forms. But mainly what it is the baby forming a bond with their primary caregiver. And this doesn't have to be the mom, but often it is, because often the mom is the one that's with the baby for the longest. They may be nursing the baby, so obviously their interaction with the baby is going to be a lot more, but it's just the primary caregiver. So if people are adopted, or if the mother isn't in the picture and the father was the primary caregiver, or you are a child of a gay or lesbian couple, it doesn't have to be the person that produces milk or the one that has a vagina. It's just whoever was the primary person that took care of you. And there's a biological reason that we have to form an attachment. As a baby, if we think about being out in the woods, way back in the day, a baby has to connect with a primary caregiver because they are solely reliant on their life. So if they need food, they need it from their caregiver. If they need things to be changed, who knows how the fuck they did that back then? Did they have leaves and wrap the leaves around the baby to fucking put a diaper? I don't know. But they had to have a caregiver for that, to be moved, to be protected, to have shelter, all of that. Everything is reliant on the primary caregiver for their survival. So obviously those that survived and attached are the ones that are going to reproduce and keep the line going. So we have, even in this day and age, a very primal reason that we need to attach as babies to our primary caregiver for survival. And if a parent can be attentive, attuned to what the baby needs, so when they cry, do they know why? Like, do they understand the different cries that the baby has? Does the caregiver hold them and help them to feel safe and secure and protected when they are in distress, right? Or do they not? So I'll talk in a minute about the different attachment styles in childhood, which is a little bit different than the ones I'll talk about in adulthood. The book, I think it's called Attached. Let me see if I can find the author, because that would be important that you all know who wrote the book Attached, which I think is a really good, it's research-based, and it's a very good book about adult attachment. But I'm going to first start off by talking about childhood attachment, and the two concepts are very similar. So Attached is by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. So I would highly recommend reading that book, because I'm going to be referencing a lot of the concepts that they talk about, but obviously if you want a deeper dive, I would go and read that book. Also, if you're interested in any of the psychological research that I'm going to be referencing, it is Harlow's Ricci Monkey Study, which is the first one I'll talk about. And then Bowlby is the one who did the majority of the attachment research. And then, oh God, what was her name? Ainsworth, Mary Ainsworth did The Strange Situation. So just jot that down if you're interested in getting a little bit more research about all of this stuff. Okay, and I just want to preface this by saying that I definitely took notes to reference the actual legitimate research, and I am going to be referencing the book Attached. I'm also going to be looking at it from a bit of a spiritual perspective, which is my own perspective. You don't have to take it. You don't have to agree with it. And obviously my interpretation, my point of view, my experiences, the treatment that I've provided may be slightly different. So please, I encourage you to go out and do your own research to see what resonates with you, what makes sense. But I'm hoping that this will help you all sort of understand yourselves a little bit better, and then understand your relationships a little bit more. Okay, so saying all that to say, this is sugar-coated in Lindsay, okay? So, yeah, that's my disclaimer. Anyway, so Harlow did a study on monkeys, and what he did was he took a large group of monkeys and separated them from everybody, their mother and other monkeys that were like similar age, which we would say are their peers, and put a group of them into cages with two types of moms. They both were wire. They were wire mommies, so they were not real monkey mommies. One was just wire baby or wired mom in the cage, and the other one was a wired mom with like cloth over it. If you look at it, it's very primitive, and the experiment sounds absolutely traumatizing for these poor monkeys. But what they did was they provided milk in either the solely wired monkey or the wired monkey with cloth on it. What they noticed was the monkeys, even if the wired monkey with no cloth, no comfort, cloth was equivalent to comfort and security, the monkeys would eat or drink the milk from the wired monkey and then immediately go over to the cloth monkey. And if they provided the milk from the monkey that had the cloth over it, obviously they preferred that. They were, I think, a little bit healthier than the other ones. But what they noticed was all the monkeys, no matter what, were always clinging to that cloth monkey, even if it didn't provide life sustenance. And so what that shows us is that simply having our basic needs met of providing food and shelter, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom layer is not enough for health and survival. They did notice, I think, in this same study, so this one I would do a little bit of extra research. It may have been this study, it may not. It may have been something that sounded similar to it. But this learned helplessness, that they found that if there was no comfort, there was no mother, that these monkeys would learned helplessness, which is just sort of giving up on life and saying, none of this is worth it. And many of them died very early. Another interesting point was that when these babies were raised, they were raised either 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months away from their mothers and from any other monkeys, so they had no social interactions. The monkeys that were raised or kept away from their mother and other monkeys for at least 9 months or more, they ended up being timid, socially inept. They were bullied by the other monkeys and then didn't stand up for themselves. And they later had problems with mating. And the females became what they called inadequate moms later on. So the key to this experiment, the takeaway from this experiment, is that babies, monkeys and humans, need warm, loving, and attentive primary caregivers, and they need social interactions to be able to form healthy relationships and a healthy psychological framework. So let me just see if I can pull something up real quick. Let's see. There's something else interesting about this. Okay, so the other thing that I found very interesting is, so when they were kept away, but then brought back into the cages with other monkeys, since they never formed a proper attachment during that time, they had a lot of behavioral issues. And I find this very interesting to sort of think about your own quote-unquote behavioral issues as a human. The monkeys engaged in bizarre behaviors such as clutching their own bodies and rocking compulsively. They were then placed back in the company of other monkeys. To start with, the babies were scared of the other monkeys and then became very aggressive towards them. They were also unable to communicate or socialize with the other monkeys. The other monkeys bullied them, then indulged in self-mutilation, tearing their hair out, scratching, and biting their own arms and legs. So, not forming a proper attachment with a primary caregiver causes some permanent damage, especially if it's, I think, 9 months or more that they are not able to form this attachment. So it's really important. Attachment is vital, right? So think about any of your own personal issues that you've had growing up. Do you have cousins, brothers, sisters, friends, kids, any of that you have seen have like extreme behavior issues? And we're not talking behavior because of autism. We're talking about behavior because maybe the parents weren't fully attentive and aware. So I love reading these things and just thinking of how it relates to people or myself, just to kind of get it solidified as like what's going on. So let's talk a little bit about the different attachment styles. So the first one is secure. Then we have avoidant, ambivalent or anxious, and then disorganized. So for secure attachment, how that develops is that the primary caregiver is attuned to the child's needs and provides for whatever they need. So if they're crying because they're hungry, they're able to figure that out, feed them and hold them. If the baby is crying because it is scared or distressed and just needs to be held, then more times than not, the caregiver will give that to them. And for secure attachments, the primary caregiver does not have to be perfect, right? Everyone has bad days where they're inattentive or maybe angry because they had a bad day. As long as it's more times than not, this is going to create a secure attachment. Also, this caregiver, it's really important that they're consistent in their life at least until the age of 2. After the age of 2, the child will actually use the primary caregiver as a base to explore what they find to be scary, unknown world, and they will return to the primary caregiver whenever they're scared, and that's to feel seen, safe, and then soothed. So if you've noticed your own children, or if you don't have your own children, if you've noticed children in general, what they'll do is they will like run into a playground to go play with kids, but then they'll look back to make sure, is mom there? Okay, cool. Now I can go play. They turn around. Is mom, oh, she's still there. Okay, cool. I'm safe to keep playing, but if she leaves, they may become distressed. Where did she go? Is she okay? I need her. And so when there's a secure attachment in any forming of attachment, the child will look back or try to connect with the mother so that they know, or the primary, because it's not always the mother. Sorry for that slip. But they know that they have a secure base so they can explore the world. So for avoidant attachment styles, usually what happens to create an avoidant attachment style is the primary caregiver is emotionally unavailable. And when we think of emotionally unavailable, I often think of parents who are severely depressed. They may be so anxious that they are caught up in their own world of fear that they aren't able to notice their child and be as attuned. This could also be a primary caregiver, like let's say both parents in the home have to work a lot to make ends meet, and so they're not physically available. They make sure food's on the table, and maybe they sit down to have a meal every day. Maybe that's their thing, but then they don't share emotionally. They aren't there for the child emotionally. They may just not be present. Or what if they just aren't they're not mentally and emotionally there for the child. So they may be insensitive to the child's needs. They are more likely than not very unaware of what the child needs. And when the child is distressed, they provide little to no response to that distress. So like for me, now I don't primarily, I'm not primarily avoidant. I think anxious, ambivalent describes me a lot better, but I did experience some of this, and you all may have if you're kind of in my sort of generation of children. But our parents, the boomers, I think they're boomers. Yeah, they're boomers. Boomers were told consistently in the culture that their children were to be seen and not heard. And that if a baby cries, you don't want them to become selfish and narcissistic, so you just let the baby cry, right? You actively ignore. Now, that does not mean that these parents were bad people. They had very, very detrimental advice. I don't know who the fuck did that suggested that you allow a child to just cry and cry and cry when they are helpless little beings in a little crib, just crying, going, I'm hungry, or I'm scared, or I'm laying in my own shit and piss, and this is fucked up. And so there is a whole generation of children who were raised by parents who were told to ignore your child, ignore their needs, because that will create independent, strong adults. Fuck that. Anyway. Crying was discouraged. Did you hear the whole adage, I'll give you something to cry about, right? I was told numerous times that if I cried out in public that I would be dismissed to another table because I guess it's embarrassment to have emotions. That sucked. And let's see. Kids have to grow up to actually parent themselves, and they pull away from ever needing anything from anyone else. So they learn to become completely independent and completely isolated and completely self-sufficient, which is not good. I will probably do a small piece in this series about codependent, independent, and interdependence. Interdependence is a concept that I heard from Jessa Reed and her Soberish podcast, which she talks a lot about some of this stuff, and it's really good. So I highly recommend you check her out if you're not already into that podcast. But yeah, I mean, as a kid, I definitely pulled away because I felt like my family didn't like me, didn't want to be around me. And so I would just go in the woods and be by myself and be like, I don't need nothing from nobody. But that's not good. It's not healthy to be completely independent. Next is the ambivalent anxious attachment style, which I highly, that's the one that I think best describes my personality and my relationship styles. So the parent here is inconsistently attuned. So sometimes they're very responsive and sometimes they're not. So this could be a parent, and I feel like for my primary, this was mostly my relationship with my primary caregiver was at times, especially like if I got hurt or something, my dad said some fucked up shit to me, I was very attuned to my mother. My mother was there for me. She was supportive, encouraging, telling me that I'm going to be just fine. I'm going to pass the tests, whatever, right? Whatever my dad said, she would come in and swoop in and help out. So at times she was very attuned to what I needed and how I was feeling. And I think because of the bad advice that was given, she definitely would just make me cry. I mean, she wouldn't make me cry. Oh my God, that sounds awful. She would just make me cry it out on my own. So if I remember being like somewhere between the ages of 4 and 6. And it was always like, if you're going to cry, go to your room and cry. And I would cry for hours and just cry myself to sleep pretty much because I was so scared and so anxious and so worked up. And I had no one to attune to me. And I just thought that was normal. I'm weak for wanting to be held and comforted and loved on. And I felt needy and awful for that. And that's very normal. So this is sort of that learned helplessness that I had talked about in just a few minutes ago. So when this happens, this inconsistent attunement and responsiveness to the child's needs, the child becomes confused, they feel insecure, and they don't really know what kind of treatment they should expect from their parent. Are they going to love me and nurture me, or are they going to turn their back and walk away and ignore me? And so it's really tough. This creates a suspicious child, and a child who becomes distrustful of their primary caregiver, but also can be very clingy as well, which is very confusing, right? I need you so bad. I want you. I need you so bad. Mommy, daddy, please, please, please. And yet feeling like they don't love me, they don't care about me, and I'm not important to them. So think about those things, right? Do you primarily, when it comes to relationships, feel like you don't want anything from your partner? You want a very independent partner that will sort of leave you alone and let you do your thing more of the relationship than not? Or are you the kind of person that gets very confused, is very distrustful in your adult relationships? Maybe at times you're very clingy, and at other times you may push them away. So like I said, I will probably in the next segment talk about the adult attachment styles and how that plays out in relationships. But let's go on to the final attachment style, which is disorganized. And again, think of yourself as we're talking about these things, and just start thinking, which one do you think feels more like yourself? So for the disorganized attachment style, these are the children that are abused, either emotionally, physically, or sexually, or all of them, or a combination. So there's an abusive primary parent. The child's dilemma in this situation is that they need the primary caregiver to survive, right? They need food, they need shelter, and they need protection or love. However, this is also the person that actually actively hurts them. So what do? Do they run away from their primary caregiver? Or do they become the best little child that they can be to soothe the abusive parent so that they stop abusing but provide for their needs? And then do they beat themselves up because they love their abusive parent, that they idealize the abusive parent, that they change everything about who they are to accommodate this abusive parent to get their needs met, but then also to have the abuse minimized, because children often believe that what's happening in their environment is the result of them, and it's not. It's not. So what happens with this child is that they disassociate from their self. So ask yourself if you've ever disassociated from your body. You ever feel spacey and like you're floating in the air? Maybe you see your body underneath you or somewhere in the room. Do you feel spacey in your head, like, I don't know, you don't know who you are, you don't know if you're real, you don't know if your environment is real? So have you disassociated as a child, and specifically as an adult? Because it may have carried from your childhood. It could also be that you had a trauma in your later childhood or in your lifetime, but did the disassociation start as a child? So there's a detachment from the actual abuse. So they create a block of the abuse from their consciousness. So oftentimes a lot of clients will say, I don't remember much about my childhood. And to me, that's an indicator that they had a very chaotic upbringing. Now, that doesn't mean that they were emotionally, physically, or sexually abused, but that does mean that they had a very chaotic upbringing. For some folks, it can be that they had addicted parents, either to drugs or alcohol. And so, again, it was very neglectful, or it could be abusive. And so they block it out because it's too much for them to deal with. And their primary thing is, I need to survive. So if you need to forget that you're being abused so that you can survive the next, 16 plus years or whatever you need, then block that shit out. That is a protective mechanism, and you can thank it. It protected you. It helped you to survive. There's no shame in the disassociative game. Anyway, so that is disorganized attachment style. Let's talk about, let's talk about you thinking about your childhood right now. Now that I've explained the different types of attachment that you may have experienced as a child, let's have you think a little bit about which one you think sounds most like you. And what is the narrative that you've been playing in your head as a child about your childhood? I often hear folks that have had difficult childhoods say, well, yeah, it was a little bit difficult, but they're really good people. I love that one. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been there before, where you want to think as though everything was great. And this doesn't mean that people are bad, right? Parents are humans. We don't get manuals. We don't get any sort of formal training. And in our society, especially in America, we don't value having a focus on emotional intelligence or ways to sort of calm and soothe people as they grow up. It is mostly, be quiet, sit in your seat, wake up early to go to school, to go do busy work and do a test that makes somebody else happy so that you can learn how to be a good, productive worker for somebody else. So when we look at these, I really want to encourage you all to not vilify our parents. It's easy, and at some points in our healing process, we need to, okay? So know when it's healthy to vilify your parents, so you can, feel that anger that you didn't get that secure parenting style so that you could then grow up to be a secure adult. But understand that your parents did the best that they could with what they knew. And oftentimes our parents and ourselves will unconsciously recreate exactly what we had experienced as children. And there's a select few that will say, fuck that, I'm never doing that. And they may go on the opposite side, but still not good, so that they make sure that their child never experiences what they experience. But then they give too much. They don't allow the child to fall down and scuff a knee and learn how to deal with the scuffed knee. So there is that pattern of fuck that, I'm doing the complete opposite, which is also not healthy. And then there's a group of us that look at what our parents did, feel the emotions and the disappointment and the anger and the sadness, and really process the grief around the childhood that you wish you had and didn't. Learn from it. Don't repeat those same mistakes, but then don't jump to the opposite end of the spectrum to then damage your child, but in a different way, because you're not doing it consciously. So be conscious of what you're doing. Give your parents a little bit of leeway in that they were doing the best that they could. And trust me, I truly believe every human on this planet is doing the best they can with what they've got, including you. You are doing the best you can with what you got. And No need to feel down on yourself for not being perfect, and no need to be down on our parents for not being perfect. Every generation has a different major plight that we're dealing with. Like, I think my generation of people are sometimes not allowing our children to experience failure and pain, and my generation is wrapping our children in bubbles and wanting to protect them from everything in this world. And that's not healthy, because they're going to fall flat on their face. And I would much rather them fall flat on their face at the age of 2 or 4, where I can hold my child and give them love and tell them that they're okay and that they can get up and keep going and that they're capable, rather than sheltering them from ever falling down. And then as an 18-year-old or 20-year-old or 30-year-old, they fall flat on their face, and it hurts so much more. So find the happy middle ground where you can attach securely, give them the love that they need and the attentiveness that they need, but also allow them to live a life. Give them the space. Be the secure base that they can come back to when they feel overwhelmed. But don't helicopter them. Don't wrap them in a bubble. And don't hurt them on purpose. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I think that that's a great place to stop. I will do my next episode on adult attachment styles, how to identify what attachment style you are specifically, how to identify what your partner or who you're dating, what attachment style they are, and talk a little bit about how to start healing that. Then after that, I will go into the twin flames versus soulmates, sex, sexuality, all that stuff, and how to heal some traumas with sex. So I look forward to being on this little journey of a couple of different episodes that we will talk about all this fun stuff: attachment, sex, relationships, and healing. All right, folks, I will see you probably on Wednesday when I drop my next episode. Have a wonderful day, and remember that you are the light.